The Alpha Pro here has been going through quite the transformation on this channel. We first converted it to Supermoto because Supermoto, but then we took it a step further in getting into the actual performance of this bike, tuning it in its stock form to insane proportions, but then immediately throwing all that away so that we can replace all the internals with a Sotion FW22 kit in it, and I haven't even tuned that yet, and I'm already starting to see just how insanely powerful this kit really is. But now it's time for the makeover portion to this bike to add some glitz, some glam, and some not so glam but very necessary electrical components, which unfortunately means exposing that rat's nest that lies underneath. That wiring harness is insanity, and I'm adding to it. Why do I do this to myself? This bike here is no longer an Alpha Pro, this is an Alpha Pro Plus, so it finally is going to live up to the name that I printed and slapped on this thing a little while ago. I'm sure you may have noticed at this point, but I'm definitely leaning into the orange and white color scheme with this bike. You've already seen that with a couple of the accessories that I put on this, like the handguards and the grips, which are both orange and white, but I've also redone some of the graphics, at least a little bit, where there was previously orange accents, I've changed those to white accents, and a lot of the things that I'm going to be adding to this today are also white. That's all in a bit, but first, the not so glam portion, electrical work. I'm doing all this to turn this bike into the ultimate street machine, so I'm not just talking a headlight here, I'm talking the full package: taillight, brake light, high beam, even a horn, which you can hear has already been added. I did all this already because I needed to get it over with. So let's turn back time and remind ourselves what lies underneath. So here you can see the controller peeled off and what I had to do behind it to actually make everything fit. Because the space of the controller right here basically takes up the entirety of the space that's allowed here in the frame. So basically all the wires come down from two spots on the top here. The one with the green is everything from the handlebars, so that's the display, that's the throttle, that's the brakes, and then on the other side is the 12 volt and the key. Then all those travel down and zip tied against the frame so that they're pushed back as far as possible, and then everything else just kind of gets tucked underneath. And I did some cleanup, but that was kind of minimal. These are just all the non-essential wires. But basically everything that we're adding is to the 12 volt, which is this gray connector right here. And this is exactly everything that we're adding. So these two wires right here, the white and the black, are the positive and negative that's going into that gray plug for the 12 volt conversion. And then everything just kind of spills out from there. First thing here is the brake switch, so I ripped this off of the original far driver wiring harness that came with the Sotion kit. Then we come down to this junction and it splits a few different ways. First one is gonna go up top to the handlebars, and there's two connections right here. This is going to be the headlight, and then this is the headlight switch. This is connected to a few other things like this one right here, which goes to a horn. Yes, I do have a horn. And then finally this one, which goes all the way down. It's gonna go to the back of the bike. This connection is going to be for the taillight and the brake light. And I basically pulled everything off of this, but just added the brake light combo from the CE Moto DO3. All right, test run time. This is an absolute mess, but hopefully it'll work. Let me show you what I did. So I changed out the plug for the 12 volt system, so it's here. So now it has a couple of pigtails in addition to what the far driver controller already had, which makes its way up top here with a couple of connections. So this plug was already here with the handlebar controls, so that's going to be now not the light and the horn, but the high beam and the horn. And then I actually do have that second connection right here, which goes to that headlight. And then we got the horn connected. This is actually gonna tuck up inside underneath the key. And finally, we have this long wire, which is gonna connect to this, which goes all the way to our extremely low profile brake light. In fact, this brake light is so small that it's been on this bike 4 months now. I actually have had it on here since before we even tuned this in stock form. It just hasn't been plugged in yet. And it's that low profile that you can't really tell unless you're looking. But now it's time to actually test this thing and see that it works before I go tucking the wires away and putting the controller back and doing all of that hard work just to find out that it's broken and I have to take it all apart again. So I got the battery connected outside of the bike right here, and let's see what happens. All right, taillight is working. Headlight you can see is working. So now I'll do a systems check to see if I click this, will it turn on the high beam? It does. And click it, it turns off. And then the horn button, that works. And finally, brake lights. Brake, 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 brake. It works. Now for the annoying part. putting it all back together. But now it's all together, and hopefully I don't have to open that up anytime soon. Although if I do have to, I did make it a little bit easier on myself by adding some spacers right here to give myself just a little bit more clearance on the controller. And because I was in there already, I added one of the first things that I wanted to add in addition to this, which you may have noticed already, some new brake lines. It's a little easier to see it on the back side here on the swing arm where it's attached, but this is a custom stainless steel braided brake line from Moto. I've gone with Moto in the past on my gas-powered bikes, and so with this one, of course, I went with an all-white line, a white banjo, and with a little bit of pop of color, some orange in the tag. So I'm halfway done with the first mount on this bike already, so that just leaves the front half, and I'm gonna make it really easy on myself because rather than just replacing the line like I did in the rear, I'm gonna replace the entire thing. That's the lever, the line, and the caliper. I already done this before on the RTR, so I had those parts laying around. It was just a matter of swapping the line and bolting it onto the bike. So I'm really glad in the front that I'm not just replacing the line, but I'm also replacing the lever and the caliper, because up top the lever has a bigger reservoir. Bigger means more brake fluid, and that's always better, right? But then down here you can see just how much bigger this caliper is to the stock one. Particularly with the rotor right here, you can see exactly the line where the pad met the rotor, and now you can see that this pad fully covers that, which means there's gonna be more surface area, which means more stopping power. We're definitely not done adding white just yet, because what's the easiest way to add a pop of color? Replace the rear shock. So I picked this up from Voltron Watts. It's got an added reservoir and of course a white spring. Now this is meant for a Tudio, but I think it should work in this case. At least I hope it does. I mean, I already had to make some tweaks to the shock by shaving a bit of the material off the side so it would actually fit inside the brackets, but now we can see how it feels. Well, it took a little bit more modification than just shaving the sides. Not only that, but I had to flip this thing upside down so that the reservoir was at the bottom in order for it to clear everything. Otherwise it was going to be smacking up against the backside of the battery. And because of that, I wasn't able to put the mud flap back underneath that and bolt it in place. So it's going to be a little floppy, but now that it's got smaller tires with the Supermotos, I don't think it's going to rub. And now that it's in, let's take a seat and see how it feels. Okay, it's got a little bit more compression. I can actually feel it moving and actually functioning. I feel like the stock one was a bit too stiff, so you really had to smack your butt down in order for it to actually compress and rebound again. So if anything, it might actually be a little bit too soft now, but thankfully this does have adjustments, so I can tighten up the preload on this, give it a little bit more stiffness, compress that spring a bit more, and I think it'll be perfect. And another thing that I'm noticing, the kickstand is gonna verify this for me. Yep, it's sitting just a little bit shorter in the rear. It's squatting. This shock is just ever so slightly shorter than the stock one, but again, that's fine. I don't really care because I don't need the ground clearance. This is not going off of dirt jumps or anything like that, but I will compensate for that by bringing the front forks up in the triple trees just a little bit. That way it's balanced out. The next addition is unfortunately not white, but very, very necessary, especially with the last modification that we put on the back here that lowered the ground clearance quite a bit, and that is an adjustable kickstand. I'm happy to see that this is actually coming standard on a lot of bikes. This very kickstand, which I got from Voltron Watts, is standard on both the Anyland Rev Pro and the Tudio Soleil. This will be a very necessary addition to the Alpha Pro Plus because this original kickstand was accounting for a big wheel kit, and at this point, I don't want this to fall over. Well, now we have the opposite problem. So I adjusted this kickstand now that it's on there to be as long as possible, and now, when we kick it down, now it leans way too far. Clearly, it's still at risk of falling over. This time, it's just gonna fall over to the left rather than falling over to the right. But thankfully, I have a lot of bikes in the garage to steal from, and the CE Moto is basically the 48-volt version of this bike, and it has a shorter kickstand because it had the smaller wheel set, so I'm gonna swap that and put the CE Moto's kickstand on the Alpha Pro and the new adjustable one back on the CE Moto. There we go. That is much better. Now the Alpha Pro Plus is actually leaning the way it's supposed to, and this one is leaning a little bit more because this aftermarket one is much shorter, so keep that in mind if you're gonna get this for a Yasmo or a Valtinzu or anything like that. It's not gonna work with anything really big, so now it leans just a little bit more than it did previously, but it's not the end of the world. One last thing in this string of add-ons, which is another takeoff part from the RTR having to do with the foot pegs, which are these from Motion Factory Racing. These are Sur-Ron style foot pegs, but they work fine enough for these mounts. Also, I'm still trying to find a good extension for these to drop the pegs down a little bit, and I know for a fact that the ones for the Razor and the Mototech won't work. So if you know of any that will work, let me know. This right here is the Enduro foot peg, by the way. It's really good if you ride in mud or snow with this big hole in the middle, but this bike isn't going anywhere near mud, so I'm gonna swap this out for something a little more street oriented. I gotta say, these are really trick foot pegs, not only because you can swap out the base platform really easily without having to remove anything else, but with this one in particular, this has a little rubber bushing at the bottom that it sits on, and it actually pivots. So you can actually rotate it just ever so slightly forward and backwards for some movement, and it provides really nice absorption on the street. Also, these are orange. These are certainly overkill for these bikes, but if you want to go overkill, or if you got another bike that you want to put these pegs on, use code LexDFox to get you 10% off.
All right, time to give this thing a little shakedown. And before anyone says anything more about the washer stacking that you saw in the last video with this, trust me, I have fixed it. I got rid of the washers, that was temporary. Now I have proper spacers at the proper lengths, and now it's just one piece on each side. And also, before anyone says anything else, I'm doing this as proper as possible. Not only is this bike registered, but it's also insured, and I have my motorcycle endorsement. And I highly recommend that anyone riding this around that's not on dirt or private land does the same. I think the rear shock is absorbing the bumps pretty well on this garbage of a road, and the brakes are allowing me to stop. All right, I've been going for a couple miles now, but I've been going pretty easy on it because I don't want to have another situation where my sprocket and chain just fall apart. So before I go any further, let's pop this off and see if anything's changed. I made some new marks on this to make sure there was no movement, and all the Sharpie marks line up on all of those washers, so we are good. Also proof there are no more washer stacks here. So now that that's solidly in place, I feel a little bit more comfortable to get up to speed. So with that, let's take it to a bigger street here and see what we top out at. In race mode, of course. It says 40, 43, but I know that's incorrect. 44, 45, woo! I'll be honest, that's a little nerve-wracking on such a tiny bike, but damn, that's fun. 45 is what we saw. All right, but what was that actually? I do have my little lie detector on. Nice, 66 miles an hour. That's a new record. Also, a few things that I've noticed now that it has the full Sotion Kit is that, first of all, it makes a lot more noise. It's just got a little bit more of a motor whine. Especially when you let off, it feels like it goes almost like you're pulling in the clutch. And then a few other things that I've noticed with the tune is that I think it's on a pretty safe one, which makes me wonder exactly how much top speed we can actually get out of this if we're going 66 on a very safe tune. Specifically where the throttle response is set really low, because I feel like it's just kind of hanging a little bit and it's a little delayed. So it's almost like it takes a millisecond or two to actually respond when I hit it, and then when I let off, it goes, and then it drops off. But don't worry, we're definitely going to do a full tune on this thing to really see what we can get out of it. And in checking out some of the other mods that we did today, everything is feeling really nice. Suspension is nice and plushy. I did add some preload to that, so it's not as squishy, but it still has some movement, so I appreciate that. It's a little softer on some of the rough stuff. And then with the brakes, yep, the front is still responsive, but not as on-off switch as it was previously. This was the same case as the RTR when this setup was on there minus the brake line, so I think it's the lever reservoir combo that just doesn't really give as much of an immediacy to it. It's a little, I don't want to say squishier, but just uses more movement. I don't know if I like that or not. I kind of prefer the on-offness of it, or at the very least where it's very, very defined where that bite point is, so I know exactly when I'm gonna get that braking, unlike this one where it just feels like, oh, okay, there it is. But everything else feels pretty good. The only complaint I have really is the foot peg placement. Even though the new foot pegs are great, they're still a little too high for my legs. I got a 34-inch inseam. I gotta put this somewhere. So as great as this is right now, I still definitely want to tune this thing up, make it more responsive, more snappy, and more power. Not that it needs it,
And tune it we shall, but that's next time. One last thing to do, besides subscribe, obviously.